Daniel, David, thank you very much for joining us today. When did you get down to Melbourne for a start?
I guess
Yesterday?
it was Sunday morning.
Sunday morning, fresh. Welcome to a new week. Maybe just before we get started, obviously we're here to talk about Alterity, but maybe if you just provide a bit of an introduction to both of yourselves, and then we'll get started from there.
So I guess I'll go first. Yep. I'm David Stamler. I'm the CEO of Alterity. I'm a physician by training, and after my training, I've spent over 25 years in drug development, starting off in large pharmaceutical companies and then moving to progressively smaller companies. And I've really found my passion in working on drugs for neurological
Why go into
diseases.
smaller companies?
Well, great question. They're not political. I believe in kind of giving credit where credit's due, and big companies, it's very political, and people try and steal the glory, and that was not good for me. So
it feels like things can move a little bit faster as well when it's a smaller company within the realms of regulation, obviously.
Right, and you get to do a lot of things and have a big impact. So all that's been great for me. I feel really fortunate because I can apply my medical training.
And you've been at Alterity
for about 9 years now.
Nice. So part of the furniture, well and truly.
Exactly.
And Daniel, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a trained neurologist. I've been practicing for about 18 years.
Yep.
I did my residency training at Mayo Clinic, and then my wife decided it was too cold, so we moved to University of Virginia, and I've been at Vanderbilt University for 15 years now.
And you've recently joined
yes,
the team at Alterity.
I did. I just became the chief medical advisor for Alterity.
What does that actually mean? What does that entail?
I basically do whatever David wants me to do, but
but you're being modest to just jump in here. He's a professor of neurology at Vanderbilt, and
I have heard you're quite the rock star in your field.
Yeah,
no pressure.
Play
the big guitar.
Chord, so it means right now we're focused on getting ready for the phase 3 study and all that comes up with that. So yeah.
So before we dive right into phase 3, let's go through what Alterity is actually focused on doing. Perhaps, David, you could just give us a breakdown. And I know that the particular focus is around MSA. Most won't have heard of MSA. Obviously, Parkinson's is more well known, but maybe just give us a bit of an insight there.
Yeah. So before I talk about like what we're targeting, Alterity is a company that we're really dedicated to treating neurodegenerative diseases. Before I came, I had been fortunate enough to work on a few drug approvals through the FDA that address neurologic symptoms of rare diseases, one of which is how I actually met Daniel. We both worked on a Huntington's program together. But what Alterity has been focused on for its existence, which is over 20 years, is really finding therapies that address the underlying pathology of the disease, which is what's critical. Symptomatic therapies are really important because they have an impact on people's quality of life, but especially for a disease like MSA, which we'll talk about in some detail, symptomatic therapies generally don't work so well, or if they do, they don't have a durable effect. So finding a treatment that can target the underlying pathology can actually have a very big impact on people's lives.
And in particular on MSA, what actually is it in terms of symptoms and what does the sort of profile look like, sadly?
I'm going to let Daniel talk about that because he's the clinical expert.
Day to day.
I can talk about it as well as a physician, but he knows it deeply,
yeah, and I
more deeply
think
than I do.
having the benefit, sad benefit in terms of being across some patients in that real life situation, be helpful to understand.
Yeah, so multiple systems atrophy really describes a collection of phenotypes of diseases that really focus on diseases that used to be called, well, this is Parkinson's, but it's different. So Parkinson's plus disease. So it's characterized pathologically by the same protein that gets messed up in Parkinson's disease, but the localization of where it gets messed up is different. So the cells in the brain, you've got the neurons, and you've got the supporting cells, like the glia. And it's really these glia cells, plus sometimes neurons that get dysfunctional in MSA, and they get these Lewy body aggregates or alpha-synuclein aggregates in it. So,
which are just proteins for the non-scientists in the audience.
So like MSA really describes the diverse set of phenotypes that present this way, and really, it's the best way to think about it. It's like Parkinson's disease, but more systems involved, like the autonomic system. That's the part of the nervous system that controls blood pressure, urination, defecation, things that you don't think about, sweating. That part of the nervous system doesn't work well. So you can imagine someone might start having problems emptying their bladder, or they might have problems with, like, when they stand up, they get dizzy, and then maybe they start getting some symptoms that look like Parkinson's, like they've got maybe a little tremor, or they're a little bit more rigid, or they're stumbling with walking. And they might go see a doctor, and they say, I think this is Parkinson's, but the medicines that you give the patient, they're not responding like they would typically with Parkinson's, or they start getting other symptoms like neck pain or things like that. And so that's really what MSA is, kind of like Parkinson's, but extra symptoms. And
in terms of how rare or how common it is, what does that sort of look like, and what is the profile of the disease in terms of, is it fast onset,
I could talk a little bit about it. I mean, it is a rare disease, and I think one of the challenges is getting a precise number on it is difficult, because it is difficult to diagnose. Yeah. It's estimated through different sources. There's kind of like hardcore epidemiology, where they estimate there might be, maybe 5 patients per 100,000, which would put it around, say, 15 to 20,000 in the U.S. But there are other insurance database methods of identifying the number of patients that might put it more like 40 to 50,000 patients in the U.S. And I would imagine Daniel might have some views on this, that it's probably somewhere in between.
Yep.
So there's a meaningful number of patients that have the disease, and as you mentioned the course, and Daniel can comment on this specifically, but it is distinct from Parkinson's disease. Even though it looks like Parkinson's early on, it is a distinct disease because they have pathology in different parts of the brain. But the other really important difference is it progresses much more rapidly. So, Daniel, you can probably comment on maybe participants in some of our clinical trials where they can go downhill, unfortunately, very rapidly.
Yeah, I think on average, you have, as a neurologist, you think about 6 to 10 years post-diagnosis, patient typically dies. So it's pretty fast, right? When we started, so where I'm at Vanderbilt. It was one of the first centers for MSA in the United States, and the doctors that have now retired, but when I first started working, I asked them about, how did you guys diagnose MSA, and they would talk routinely about misdiagnosis, like patient's been seen, things are changing, and they finally got to that doctor. And we actually looked at this, and we did a large questionnaire-based study, and found that on average, it takes 7 doctors before a person gets a diagnosis of MSA. And you can imagine what that's like for a family who's trying to figure it out.
How can you change that? Because we talked about earlier about Michael Klim and his very different diagnosis around CRDP and the frustration.
Yep.
And there's a level of grief that goes through that in terms of the change. How can you change that from in a medical setting? Is it education? Is it awareness? Is it new tests? What?
Yeah,
he can answer that, but I just want to remember something that someone I went to medical school with once said, which is failure to consider a diagnosis is the most common reason for failure to diagnose. So if you don't think about it and you don't know about it, you're not going to.
So there is a level of awareness.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look at MSA patients, they usually come down two different roads. Like the one road would be a person who's got a lot of autonomic dysfunction, like I was telling you earlier. Like maybe they've got low blood pressure when they stand up, or they're dizzy all the time, or they're kind of feeling, they've got urinary problems. And so they might actually see a doctor who specializes in autonomics, right? And then the other person might be someone that goes down the movement disorder pathway, like they've got rigidity, or their gait's not working, not proper. So I think one of the challenges for MSA diagnostically is that it's not everyone's going to the same clinic, right? And the symptoms can be extremely heterogeneous, right? You could have someone that, we were just talking with a patient's wife, and she was saying that her husband's first symptoms was acting out his dreams at night, right? Like, and so he would dream and like punch his wife, and like that's who do you go see for that, right? So I think that's one of the challenges for MSA. But to answer your question, what we need is quantitative biomarkers that say that this person likely has MSA, and we are way closer to pulling that out in real life now than we were, say, like before we even started this Alterity phase 2 trial. And really, the way that the science is moving is that it's going to be probably a combination of neuroimaging, so like brain scans, and getting quantitative data to say, well, this is looking like MSA, not Parkinson's, and not other rare diseases. It's going to be biofluid biomarkers, so like taking CSF, cerebral spinal fluid out, like a lumbar puncture, or taking blood out, and getting some tests that say this is looking like this. It's going to be figuring out assays about the synuclein, like we talked about alpha-synuclein. Can you come up with an assay that figures something, this is looking like MSA or Parkinson's or something else? And it's going to be, maybe some clinical phenomenology that is acting differently from another disease. And it's going to be a combination of those types of things that I think is going to help advance the field. And I think it's worth saying that, as for as many people that don't get diagnosed, there are other people that, sometimes get on the internet and say, oh my gosh, I've got MSA. And you have to well, no, actually that's not MSA. So it's like, we're focusing now on MSA, but, in the healthcare system in the United States, probably the same in Australia, there's a lot of pressure on clinicians to get done more patients with less time.
Yeah.
It's a big challenge. So I think this is kind of a, finding centers of excellence, establishing better routes for when you have a symptom, who do you see, establishing clear protocols for what you're testing and what the data means. I think all that's coming into play.
Now, you talked about phase 2. Maybe just sort of give us an update as to where you're at, with regards to the FDA status and regulatory approval, and what, I'm assuming because it's such a rare disease, in terms of orphan drug status and whatnot. Maybe just explain what that actually means for the layman, including myself.
Yeah. So orphan drug status is a designation that you can get in the United States and in Europe with slightly different rules, but it's based on just the prevalence of a disease. So if you can demonstrate that there are fewer than 200,000 patients with a disease in the United States, you can get orphan drug status, and that gives you various advantages, tax advantages, and they're really trying to incentivize companies to develop new treatments for those rare diseases.
And in terms of the sort of interaction with the FDA around something like this, and I know we spoke before, we started recording around, there's just nothing out there at the moment in terms of that helps treatment, let alone cures. Does it help in terms of the discussions and sort of coordination along the way, and anything around fast track or anything like that?
Well, it does, yeah. So we talked about orphan, which is strictly based on the prevalence, and then fast track, which is another FDA designation, is separate, and that is reserved for diseases that that are serious, which means they're debilitating like MSA is, or they're fatal, and for which there is, no good treatment. So, and so that's kind of one criteria you need to meet for fast track. And the other is you need to demonstrate some promise, some potential to address the disease, whether it's by preclinical studies, animal studies that have an experimental form of the disease, or even our phase 2 data. So we do have fast track designation as well, which gives us different sorts of advantages and through the FDA. So that's where those 2 designations are in place. And I think you asked, Simon, about where we are in development. We did have a phase 2 data that read out last year with, I think, a very very strong signal, something that's not been shown before in treating kind of the functional impairments that Daniel was referring to that occur in MSA. So that trial, we have used the data from that study to go propose a phase 3 study, which is kind of the definitive study that you need to support an approval.
Bring the drug to market.
Yeah, and we're expecting to have that interaction with the FDA in the middle of
this year. And when you talk about data and whatnot from phase 2, what's the sort of the clear number or the clear sort of point to this that means it's making an impact? What did that sort of look like?
Yeah, well, I'll just introduce the scale, and then I'll let maybe Daniel talk about the results itself. So I think the key scale that we use to assess the disease is called the MSA rating scale, and it's got various components. And the part that we focus on is called Part 1, and that assesses various activities of daily living that can have an impact on people's quality of life. So things like speech, or swallowing, or fine motor skills, so that they can dress themselves or take care of themselves, whether it's brush their teeth or comb their hair, but also things like walking, falling, that Daniel, kind of mentioned before, are key aspects of the disease. So that's an endpoint that's really important if you can think about the progression of this disease. And then, Daniel, why don't you just jump in and talk about what result we saw and what you think that might mean for a patient?
Yeah, I like this environment because I can tell stories. But when we unlock the data for the end of phase 2, when phase 2 was finished, I got on the computer and looked at it, and it's there's a few things in life I'm very proud of, but one of them is that I was able to look at the result before David did, because I think he was in the shower or something like that when it came up. And I called him. I was like, "Holy moly! Did you look at the graph? This is incredible." He's like, "No, I haven't. I'll call you back." But it was one of those things that it was really striking to see, approaching 50% reduction in the rate of progression. I mean, that's incredible. I mean, I just can't tell you, as a neurologist who's I've been involved in a ton of different drug trials as a coordinating investigator, as a site investigator. I really think the current existential crisis for doctors and families is like, we don't have things that change neurodegenerative pathways. We're starting to see things, like the ALS compound that you might have talked about with people that have that certain genetic variant. We're starting to see things change, but I mean, it's existentially a huge challenge. But to see a drug, we worked so hard on making sure we got the right patients in the trial and the right outcomes, and to see that signal was incredibly encouraging, because it really means that this might be part of the story. Like, you get diagnosed, you get this treatment, and it slows the progression. You're able to work longer. You're able to stay upright longer. You're able to spend more time with your family talking about whatever it is you want to talk about. So I think, from a functional standpoint, this was a really compelling result.
And David, you've been at this 9 years. Sort of hearing someone who's on the front line in terms of seeing patients day to day and hearing that sort of response, of a market shift in potential treatment and slowing progression. How rewarding or how excited? And again, I know there's a lot of water to go under the bridge and whatnot, but that you're actually on the right path.
Yeah, it's. I think it is an incredible feeling because many have tried, and various academic groups have tried various therapies that may show some promise in an animal model or in in the test tube, but and other pharmaceutical companies are pursuing the same thing, and to date, no one's shown what we've shown. So it is very rewarding. I think I feel fortunate to work with a dedicated team of people that that have been working on this program so hard for so long, so it is very rewarding as a physician, as a scientist, and even though I'm not seeing patients anymore, they're still very close to my heart and very close to how I think about this. I know that the Huntington's treatment that we developed together before, that was similarly rewarding, and I still remember kind of telling a personal story that it didn't seem real because we went through the trials and you go through the application with the FDA and then you negotiate the drug label. And it wasn't until I talked to someone who was on the commercial side of it and he said, there are 1,000 Huntington's patients that are already getting that drug. And it was like, I got chills. Yeah. I was like, wow, 500 people are getting that drug and it's well tolerated and it's making a difference. So I can only hope that we can do the same thing for patients with MSA.
I met Tina earlier before you guys came in, obviously Tigizard's wife. How much of, we talk about obviously the patient experience, but from a carer or a wife, and it's hard not to get emotional talking about this. How important is it to be able to sort of look at someone like a Tina in the future and say we can do something in terms of might not be able to cure it, but when you talk about 7 to 8 years, it might extend that, and obviously every day, every year, every month, is pivotal in terms of spending time with a loved one. How do you sort of look at that?
Yeah, so I think what you're talking about is the word hope, and I think hope comes in different flavors and different experiences for people. I think the first, to set up the premise for hope is to realize that MSA, along with other neurodegenerative diseases, are just tragic by nature. You're living your life, you've got plans for the future, you have kids, and then something happens that completely derails it. And that's usually the context of where these situations with families start. And then you find that you need more help, or your wife's having to do a heck of a lot more in caring for you. And part of that hope is, well, what can I take? And then with MSA, we try as best we can to use medicines that are symptomatic. We might try medicines that we repurpose from Parkinson's to MSA or improve your blood pressure, but they don't necessarily work effectively all the time, and they don't change the dynamic. And so I think having a therapy that provides a patient hope is really important. And so I think part of the goals for clinical trials is to also have patients and loved ones feel like they're doing something for the future.
And maybe just on, I think it's combat MSA and the relationship with Tina. Maybe if you could just sort of expand on the relationship there.
Well, that's just forming. I think unfortunately, with Teague's illness, that we were introduced to Tina's foundation, And I think they're really just kicking off, but also making a big impact already. I know they're really trying to increase awareness.
I think that's the biggest thing, right?
Yeah.
Because I think one of the key things that before this is a sort of familiarity concept. If you don't know someone who's had MSA or someone well known in terms of public identity, it's hard to sort of relate. Whereas looking into it, and obviously hearing Tina's story and Teague, it does definitely build that awareness. So I think the relationship there.
I think she's really focused broadly, and there's awareness among patients who have these diverse symptoms that Daniel mentioned. But I think there's also important education among physicians to be aware of the diverse symptoms that can manifest, and then ultimately, if they consider the diagnosis, then that's their one step ahead, getting into the right clinician who can help really manage all aspects of the disease.
I love obviously the fact that your company's trying to do good. It's always an awkward one in terms of talking, but it's obviously an investment in terms of it's listed on the ASX, so it's a hard step to jump to. But in terms of what it looks like for an investor, obviously you're talking about mid-2026 in terms of negotiations with the FDA and what it looks like going into phase 3. What are sort of critical, what you call re-rating milestones, to put it crudely?
Yeah, and that's okay. Listen, I think I know as a CEO and as a physician, I know that you have to do the business side of it to bring the drugs to the patients. So what is in the short run, what's going to be important is reaching agreement with the FDA on that design of that pivotal trial, the so-called phase 3 trial. That is the most immediate re-rating thing that we need to do. And as I talk to investors, I've told them I don't see that as a particularly risky type of meeting. Sometimes you have controversial topics. I think I view this one as more confirmatory, where we have a very clear sense of what we believe the next study is going to look like, and we need their concurrence on that. So that's one important milestone. And then we're doing the process right now of setting up the trial, where we're identifying the vendors that we're going to work with to help us execute the study, who are going to run some of the laboratory tests. And then ultimately, we have to find identify the sites, and that's where Daniel's going to play a key role.
And in terms of touch wood again, commercializing the drug, it's obviously an oral tablet, so it's not an injectable, which is easier to digest. What does it look like in terms of going to phase 3? How long that takes? And again, all these things will flesh out once you've come away from the FDA. But is that 3 to 5 years? Is that a 12-month trial? Without going into too much detail.
Yeah, no, I think simply we believe the overall study, phase 3 study, will take us about 2.5 years to run. So if we get feedback, reach agreement with the FDA middle of the year, then it typically takes about 6 months to set up a study, because you need that final protocol, and you have to go through all the ethics committees review and the other regulatory bodies, whether it's the FDA or the TGA or the European versions of those. And then we expect it'll take us about a year, maybe a little over a year, to enroll the 200 or so patients we are targeting. And then if the last patient completes 12 months, that's another year. And then you need additional 3 or so months to clean the database and then lock it and then generate the data. So, and obviously you can have delays here and there. Things can take a little bit longer. So that's why I estimate about 2.25 to 2.5 years.
And I know investors are impatient, and obviously you've been with the company 9 years. Things don't happen overnight, but in between, let's call it the next 3 years. Is there other different things that the company is focusing on at all in terms of other drugs or other?
Yeah, there's 434 is kind of an amazing drug because it has potential to treat other important neurodegenerative diseases, and Daniel touched on Parkinson's disease. There's some similarities between Parkinson's disease and MSA in terms of the pathology. So there's the potential to go into Parkinson's disease, and we've been pursuing patent strategies that would kind of make that feasible. So that's one area. There are other orphan diseases, such as a disease called Friedreich's ataxia, where there is an imbalance of iron, which is how 434 works, where we could potentially target that disease. We do have other drugs in our patent portfolio that we can advance into the clinic. And there's also always opportunities for licensing new drugs. There are opportunities that we're entertaining right now. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for growth.
And in terms of whether it's longer term or otherwise, partnering or commercial partner in terms of 434. Obviously phase 3 trials aren't cheap.
Right.
How does that sort of look in terms of funding or partnering or?
We've had a tremendous amount of inbound interest in this program and in this molecule. I think from a purely commercial standpoint, given the significant unmet need for MSA patients translates into there are no approved therapies. And because it is an orphan disease that gets preferential pricing, there's a big commercial opportunity. So we've had a lot of interest from big pharmaceutical companies, from mid-sized pharmaceutical companies. I think that's a very fertile ground and something that we're very actively looking at.
That sounds exciting. And probably just to finish up here, I might leave it with Daniel. If it's 2030 and 434, successful in terms of phase 3 trials and it's commercialized, with a partner or not, how does that change in terms of, inpatient, in clinic and the conversations there and the treatment that you set?
Well, I think primarily what it means is that I've got something now in my armamentarium that can help this patient, which right now we don't. I think it completely changes the dialogue in that room. You're diagnosed with MSA. Now we're going to give you this 434 medication, and here's what we're hoping to see. And I think it just changes the narrative. Probably ends up changing how fast MSA gets diagnosed.
Because it becomes critical, right?
Yeah. Probably changes how clinics set up, their services, which is what you typically see. When you see a compound approved, there's so many downstream effects on how clinics run, how patients get seen. So, I think it would change the landscape of MSA. I think it goes back to hope. I was going to
finish on there.
People,
Yeah, exactly. Guys, thanks so much for coming in and all your hard work. Obviously, wish you all the best and good luck in the middle of the year and beyond.
Great.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.